thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
This is the Daily Memphian Politics Podcast. I'm Bill Dries. The main event, a call from more than a dozen nonprofits in our city to keep the city and county property tax rates where they are in a year of rising property values. Top of the podcast, the siren song of a third bridge across the Mississippi River at Memphis or somewhere close to Memphis. Democratic State Representatives Dwayne Thompson and Joe Towns of Memphis calling for the state to get busy on a third automobile and vehicle bridge. This at about the 2-week point in the closure of the Hernando de Soto Bridge for repairs to damage to a steel box beam supporting the bridge that apparently went unnoticed by Arkansas bridge inspectors for at least 5 years. The 2 rail bridges here now would presumably be the 4th and 5th bridges by this count if you are discussing a third bridge for cars and truck traffic to be built. And if you're discussing that, welcome to about the 2-decade mark in such discussions. That's about the time state and federal transportation officials began making moves in that direction. A Memphis contingent calling for the river crossing to be here, and others in the broader area calling for it to be north of the city. When Thompson and Towns talk about the need to get started on this is the timing that they're talking about. Meanwhile, Tennessee Governor Bill Lee questioning the federal commitment for infrastructure funding to repair the closed bridge and urging patience by Memphians. Republican U.S. Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee signing on to co-sponsor the Bridge Investment Act in Congress, reintroduced this week in D.C. It is $311 billion over 5 years, specifically for bridge construction and repairs, although it's not clear if the current work on what we call the new bridge, nearly 50 years after it opened, would qualify if the bill were passed. Also this past week, Hagerty posting a video on Twitter of an exchange he had online with Biden administration Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. Hagerty complimenting the administration on speeding up a federal response to the immediate problem on the bridge. He also said investment in infrastructure should not require, quote, raising taxes on American workers, a reference to Biden administration plans to raise taxes on corporations and those making more than $400,000 a year. Hagerty also talking about some private capital financing of infrastructure, no mention of a third bridge. In hindsight, the budget season at City Hall was going just a bit too smoothly. It looked like the Memphis City Council was cruising to a $716 million operating budget with a stable, recertified property tax rate of $2.71 with no tax hike. But earlier in the month, the city and county and other local governments got some new guidance from Washington on the ground rules for using the federal American Rescue Plan funding, specifically how to use it to replace revenues lost in the pandemic. That's when the recalculation and the jitters began. By this past week, the Strickland administration had a dollar figure to take to the City Council's Budget Committee. The new guidance has essentially left the city budget with an $18 million hole. That's the same sized hole that Mayor Jim Strickland said the city would have had to fill without the federal funding when he presented his budget proposal in April. And add another $5 million to that hole when the Tennessee legislature cut in half the $10 million the city was to get from the state to help with the revenue ding that local governments took. The legislature came to the conclusion that with Memphis getting $160 million in ARP funds and the city seemingly cleared to use that for revenue replacement, that it didn't need the full $10 million from the state. The cut was made and the legislature adjourned for the year. So a total of $23 million in red ink the city has to fill. First things first, no final budget votes at the June 1st City Council session as previously planned. That's now pushed back to the June 15th council meeting to get final answers from the feds on what the ARP funding can and cannot be used for. Other options, if the answer from Washington is the same, include budget cuts or possibly using revenues from the half-cent sales tax hike approved in 2019 that the city has been collecting toward restoring benefits to police and firefighters that were cut by the city in 2014. Sales tax revenue overall for Memphis and other local governments did not take the hit anticipated as the pandemic shutdown unfolded, although sales tax revenue from hotel-motel stays and other tourism-related spending did, and that has affected the financing of some city projects. A real divide at the outset among council members about using the half-cent sales tax revenue that is in a separate city fund. The administration has put some of that revenue to use for different purposes since the referendum approving it, but with the consent of the police and fire unions, the two groups who put the sales tax hike on the ballot after the council refused to. Even before Election Day in 2019, Strickland asserted the city's right under terms of the city charter to use the revenue for other purposes, despite the wording of the referendum, while Strickland also said his intent was to abide by the wishes of voters. Shelby County commissioners are heading toward a June 7th wrap on their budget season. That is a quick passage of budgets and tax rates on the county side, with a review in the fall to come of how to use ARP federal funds to supplant local money and then what to do with the local money. Kind of a budget post-season, if you will. Sounds simple, but this is something that Shelby County Mayor Lee Harris and Budget Committee Chairman Edmund Ford Jr. agree on. And that agreement is no small matter. Still, there is one issue that commissioners will deal with at the June 7th meeting. The $3.45 recertified county property tax rate is a rounded off number that is rounded down to take off an extra part of a penny in the calculation of a rate that generates the same amount of revenue as the current $4.05, taking into account the rise in property values and this year's reappraisal for taxation purposes. Ford puts that 0.001 part of a penny at generating just shy of $250,000 in revenue, but no more than two places after the decimal in the tax rate, the state says. It's a whole penny or nothing. And in order to do a whole penny, the commission would have to propose and vote on that increase separately. And a whole penny comes in at generating more than $2 million in revenue. Meanwhile, tax hike votes in the suburbs. In Collierville, a final vote June 14th on a 15-cent property tax hike to a total tax rate there of $1.72 after a recertified rate, that to fund a $90.3 million town budget. Coming up for a third and final vote, a 24-cent property tax hike proposed in Bartlett, above a recertified tax rate there of $1.51 to fund a $180.9 million budget proposal by Mayor Keith McDonald. While we're on the subject, the race to succeed McDonald as mayor in the 2022 Bartlett elections already taking shape, with Alderman David Parsons and Bobby Simmons the early declared candidate. McDonald telling our Omer Yusuf this past week that he will be backing Parsons. As Shelby County commissioners were taking up a resolution calling on Tennessee Governor Bill Lee to veto the bill that bans the teaching of critical race theory in Tennessee public schools, Lee signed the bill into law in Nashville. The commission's 11-0 vote came after the Memphis City Council approved a similar resolution on the matter. Lee's signature came during a busy day in which he did public signing ceremonies for several other bills passed by the legislature, but not for the critical race theory ban. Former two-term Republican Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam online this past week, the day his new book was released, Faithful Presence, The Promise and the Peril of Faith in the Public Square. In the book and during the online forum as part of Haslam's role as co-chair of Vanderbilt's Project on Unity and American Democracy, Haslam said partisan discord in America is on par with the discord between Israelis and Palestinians. He also calls for people of faith on both sides to reclaim the public square by letting their faith determine their politics. Currently, Haslam believes that is the other way around. And he said the term evangelical has lost a lot of meaning in his opinion. Haslam will be joining us on the next edition of this podcast to talk about all of that and more. Joining us now is Cardell Orrin, Memphis Director of Stand for Children Tennessee, here today as part of a coalition of more than a dozen local nonprofits who recently called for a moral budget by city and county governments, one in which the county property tax rate stays at $4.05 and the city property tax rate stays at $3.19. The estimate is keeping the tax rates the same, with the increase in property values with this year's reappraisal creates about $180 million in new revenue, city and county combined. Cardell, you and the other nonprofit leaders who made this call in the past week call this a moral budget. Explain that and where this new tax revenue would go.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Bill. The underwriting piece on a moral budget comes from that quote many people may have heard, that a budget is a moral document. And with that, any budget that we set out, whether it's our home budget, whether it's our government budget, shows what our values are, what our priorities are, what are the things that we hold dear and think about for our government budgets, for our community. And so in looking at that, I think we've looked at over the years, seeing our budgets not really change a whole lot and not really be focused on the things that we came together as organizations to say we thought we should focus on, thinking about people, communities, workers, culture, and engagement. So we saw this budget process going through with the city and the county and said, well, this is not the moral budget that we would think of. This does not reflect our values. This is not what's going to lead us to progress and prosperity. So around the same time, the city council, county commission were doing their hearings, we started coming together and saying, all of these organizations we pulled together working on various issues, what are the things that could impact the issues that we're working on? Or what are things that have been worked on for years and decades in public transportation and education and affordable housing? There are persistent issues in our community. And so we came together and did our own budget process and put together this budget we call the Memphis Shelby County Moral Budget to reflect these investments that we think are necessary to move us forward and get us out of this rut of the same old budget that we're stuck in, that actually gets us to progress and prosperity for Memphis and Shelby County. And the way that we do that and fund it, we also, as you mentioned earlier, talked about that as well, that we have to generate new revenue based on the value and wealth that's been created in our community.
Mm-hmm. And a major part of the money here would address the big capital campaign, Reimagine 901, that Shelby County Schools has outlined, which is a pretty significant set of projects, from new school construction, including a new Fraser High School, all the way to lots of deferred maintenance. So a portion, that's a possibility. A portion of what we've put in there around education is what we call Youth Education Success Fund, which is actually putting funds in a budget for education that focuses on 3 targeted areas of early literacy, health and mental health, and high school success. So specifically in this, it's not focused on the facilities, but we do think that that's an important area that, we only are looking at a portion of what the revenue increase would bring in. And certainly, the next thing on that list would be fully funding the facilities plan that gets us great facilities for all our young people across the county. Got it. So some of the funding that you're talking about for Shelby County Schools is not Reimagine 901. It's the classroom stuff. It's the literacy stuff.
Yes.
the operating budget stuff to just get technical about it.
Yes, and creating more equity in that. So the target of the YES Fund, Youth Education Success Fund, is to target it towards districts and schools that have the highest need, that have the highest percentage of economically disadvantaged students. Whereas we know generally funds that are going to education are going equally across the board to all the districts, whether they have wealthier communities or not.
Got it. In looking at this, and I think you alluded to it earlier, because certainly this is not far from this is very far from the first discussion that there's been about shouldn't our budget priorities be different. These discussions have been going on for a long time. Why not try to change the priorities in the city and county budgets instead of adding to them for an even bigger budget?
I would say that especially on the city side, where we know that there's already been a gap in the budget, that I think many of us certainly, maybe not all, but certainly support reallocation of dollars in the city and county budgets. And we know that the only places, for the most part, that have been rising in budget on the city side has been police and fire that consistently have risen, that where the police budget has doubled over the last 20 years, even as the investment from the city in education went down to zero. And I've talked about this before. And so, really, we think that in a lot of ways, portions of city services, especially, and even on the county side, have been almost cut down to what are the bare bones, because when they've been able to cut, they've just continued to cut for the gaps in the budget or hit the reserves. So we haven't generated or taken advantage of new revenue, even to keep up with the cost of living changes. This is why the Mayor Strickland can propose a salary increase only for police and fire and not recognize the necessity of an increase in the actual salary for all of our city workers, because we're down to the bare bones. That's why we have these gaps in our budget that we're filling with federal dollars. And so the only way that that's probably possible, we cannot cut our way. We can probably not even reallocate unless we were drastically rethinking how we approached safety and justice in our community through police and fire and focusing on more community efforts. And that just doesn't seem to be where the administration or local legislators are right now. And so in general, we think that this additional revenue is needed to grow the budget and grow these investments that just don't seem to be there. Like you said, we've had these discussions for years and years about what we can do. And it's always a case of the money isn't there. Otherwise, we'll have to cut these things. And do you want us to cut sanitation workers? Do you want us to cut more out of planning and development? And those aren't the places where we want to cut. And there's not the courage or vision right now to dig into the police budget, which is where, the largest portion of the city budget is.
Mm-hmm. Given the ongoing impact of the pandemic, is this the right time to raise taxes, actually raise the amount of taxes that many property owners will pay, even though under this proposal, the tax rates would be the same as they are now?
So this is part of where we have to really dig into the data and the information. Do we know that you say a majority of taxes would go up, what people pay would go up? I don't know that we know a majority would go up. We know that value has increased, wealth has increased in areas where there's been significant investment already, downtown, midtown, Poplar Corridor, East Memphis. That's where we tend to see value in properties going up. If we go to North Memphis, South Memphis, we don't see them going up as regularly. We see some movement up in Frazier because of the work that's being done there, maybe in a few other areas. But I kind of challenge the notion until we start to really dig into the data. And this is data that we're trying to collect right now to start to think, where is it going up? Because remember, property values have to go up above the average for it to really impact people who are living in homes that are not going up. And even when it goes up for a large portion of the population, what does that mean? It might mean $50 to $100 more a year on average. And so is that worth it for people to have an actual functioning public transit system that actually meets the needs of the people? Is that worth it to even just begin to address the 30,000 in affordable housing units that we need? Is that worth it to give a better education for our children? Those are the choices that we're making implicitly like right now. And we're saying, hey, let's make these choices intentionally and put it in front of the public for a different discussion.
Mm-hmm. So to your point about facts and figures, there are a lot. And to be sure, property values have gone down in some parts of the city where those values have historically dropped during the once every 4-year reappraisals. But the assessor of property, Melvin Burgess Jr., has estimated that for the countywide reappraisal, taking the whole county as diverse as it is, that his estimate is that there has been an average 20% increase in property values.
Yes, so that's true. That's the average value across the whole, as you said, multi-economic status of our whole county. We think that it's necessary to start to think about, from an equity lens, from a fairness lens, where are the places where we need investments, where we're not getting investments, and where are property values going up significantly. And let's make some real choices about whether there's a component of this where we need people to pay their fair share for our whole community to advance. What we have now is a drive to drive down the tax rate, to try to pull in more businesses, to try to generate more workers and things like this. Is trickle-down economics is the philosophy that we have had for the past several decades. And we can see from our poverty rate, from our job growth numbers, from any number of objective statistics about our economic development, that it's not working. And we believe that there is a bottom-up approach where you can invest in people and communities that will actually drive real progress and prosperity, and actually provide us with the broader community progress that will actually allow you to rethink the property tax rate at some future time when there's actually value and wealth being created across our community. Andre Perry has a book, Know Your Price, and even the city had him come in, and Mayor Strickland did a special interview with him. And a report from Brookings, where he works, says that Black homes in majority Black neighborhoods are devalued 22.6% in Memphis. And so that even matches what we've seen. The increase in wealth has been in certain areas of our county and average across the county. But we've got numbers that show the devaluation of properties in Black communities. The majority of our community can be as much as 20% as well. Mm-hmm. Devalued. Right. And I believe he spoke at the city's last housing summit. That was it. Right. Mm-hmm. Yep. On this podcast a week ago, Shelby County Commissioner Tammy Sawyer, who a year ago was one of 4 votes for an 8-cent county property tax hike proposal, said nobody on the body this year is going to vote for keeping the county tax rate at $4.05, much less raising it from the recertified rate of $3.45. And there are similar indications on the City Hall side of the street. So realistically, is the tax rate part of the moral budget that you've outlined? Can it happen? Is it going to happen? Or are you looking for maybe some penny or 2 or 3 above what the recertified rate is realistically? Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we get real investment. This is the choices that our elected officials have to make. And these are the expectations that we have to set as a community. I think that last year, even when they tried to do this, there wasn't as much of a community cry. There wasn't as much coordination with the community organizations and individuals to engage in as part of that process to try to help drive to say, this is our community needs this increase. Our community needs this investment. And I'm also not sure that there was clarity around where those investments would go, which is a part of, not just here, but across the country when you're trying to gain more revenue, showing where these things will go and how they'll impact the community. And so I think that bringing those things together and making the demand from the community side is what our hope is. And that it's not at some, penny or 2 amount, which, on the county side, a penny is about $2 million. On the city side, that's about $1.4 million. Again, this is playing at the edges of any kind of investment and advancement of progress and prosperity across our community. And we think that, at the very least, you need to get to 20, 30 cent above the recertified level. And again, remembering that this drastic reduction is a conservative state mandate to try to keep government small, that has a conservative viewpoint of what government is. And so to say that we're raising the tax rate when it has to be recertified based on a state mandate is kind of playing with the idea and drives into the conservative favor of a viewpoint, again, of a trickle-down economics perspective that says we can't access this wealth that's been created in our community, that when people sell their homes, when they remortgage, when they do any of these things, they're going to gain that value and that wealth, and it's not going to spread out into the areas we need in our community. So to your point, to your question, I'm not sure if it can happen. My hope is that there are the votes there. My hope is that we get a vote on it, because we also know that we have elections next year for county commission and the next year after that for city council. And so these are the expectations we're trying to drive into the community, that whether it happens now or whether we set expectations of that for future elections, these are things that we're going to keep pushing as a community.
Mm-hmm. As bleak as the forecasts seem, I have to mention that on the other hand, as we reviewed in the top of the podcast segment here, there have been property tax hikes proposed in the suburbs, Bartlett,
right.
Collierville,
Yes, exactly.
in particular. What are your thoughts when you hear that?
It's kind of the crazy part of what we see in addressing this, that in Bartlett and Collierville, we'll see what happens in the other municipalities. They're saying, yes, we've gained wealth in this community, and we need to access some of that and apply it to whether it's education or our municipality, our cities. We need to apply that. We've seen that happen 3 or 4 years ago in Chattanooga, and they made a major investment in education. In Nashville, the mayor was super smart and took the hit on the increase last year, increased it 35%, raised the bar for the revenue, so that this year they'll still do a reduction probably based on the state mandate, but they will have gained access to the 35% increase from last year, which allowed them to do an $80 million investment in education. And so and that's a moderate mayor in Nashville. Mm-hmm. And so these are the ideas that, we're just trying to make the case and just thinking maybe as a community, as residents, we haven't made it clear enough what our values and priorities are and what we want our elected officials to do for us in our trust. And so that's what we're making the call around now, to try to pull this out and make it more of a community discussion, which we hope it will be now and going forward, where it's not just the accepted practice, which it has been, to automatically say, let's reset to this conservative state mandate, and then anything above that is increasing the tax rate. No, the tax rate is what we set it at. The conservative state mandate says you have to lower it, and then resetting it to the tax rate we had before is maintaining the tax rate.
So, and we should also point out that Nashville is on the same 4-year reappraisal cycle that we are on here in Shelby County for property reappraisals. So they reappraise at the same time that we do. To your point about resetting the tax rate, isn't there a need for people to know how much of a tax rate generates the same amount of revenue, though? I mean that seems to be something that these bodies can raise the tax rate if they want to, but they just have to do it separately from what the reappraisal and the recertified rate comes in at. So isn't that a way of knowing what the increase in your value means in terms of dollars and cents?
I would agree. And, if you look at the video the controller has for the state in explaining reappraisals and recertification of the tax rate, it kind of explains it in that same way. And that would potentially be true if we were transparent about what that means for everybody, or individually, or even in different areas or different districts of our community, of our city and county. But we're not. So it gets communicated as the same thing. Like you said, the average value increase in the county is 20%. And so it gets communicated that way, but that's not happening everywhere. That's not equally or equitably like discharged throughout or distributed throughout our county. And so we talk about the truth and transparency that brings, and that's the idea. Like it makes some sense on that level, but it also has been a mechanism to try from a certain, perspective, economic perspective or government policy perspective, to limit government, because at the same time, you can make the argument that the tax rate is where it is, and then local government should have the ability to move it down or up as it sees fit based on the transparency of what the new values and wealth created in our community will generate. Certainly at the state level, we've seen, huge surpluses, and there's been no transparency about what the level is for what the sales tax is, right? Like we're not talking about, a mandate around reducing the sales tax because we've got huge surpluses at the state level. So these are conversations that fit in like our sunshine laws. They fit for some places in the localities, but at the state level, it's a different viewpoint. And so, I think that it's a bit more complicated than just saying, it resets it and it makes it transparent, shows what the value is, because we're not being clear and transparent about where wealth is being created in our community and when we don't reset the tax rate to the amount, who that's helping and who it's not, and the proportionality of the help and the assistance it's giving based on the wealth that's being created by the value added to people's property.
All right. For people who want to give this a look, want to look at the details of the moral budget, which also we should point out would include funding the Memphis Area Transit Authority's transit vision, something that's been out there for, I think, the last 5 years and hasn't even started on the way to funding. That's one of the priorities in the moral budget, correct?
Yes, that's one of the clear priorities. Let's get the $30 million that MATA has said it needs in the past 5 years to have an actual functioning, well thought out system.
And the website?
The website, you can go to bit.ly/moralbudget901. That's bit.ly/moralbudget901. And you can access action to email our elected officials and also click on the link there that shows you the full budget document that we put together.
All right. As we wrap this up, a quick verdict from you, a quick opinion on you. What do you think about the proposal to go to every other year property reappraisals that's been advanced by the assessor and is a proposal that's now pending before the county commission?
I think it makes a lot of sense. I think we won't have these drastic shifts every 4 years that we see that make people even more angry that, if they see, increases, angry until they have to sell their houses, and they'll be happy for these reappraisals up. But the 2 years, to me, makes a lot of sense, especially when we depend so much on property taxes for our local government, that it makes sense to have opportunities to access that wealth that's being created in our community every 2 years rather than waiting for every 4. So all around, it seems for residents and for government, it seems like that would make sense.
All right. We've been talking with Cardell Orrin of Stand for Children, part of the coalition behind the proposed moral budget here in Memphis and Shelby County. Subscribe to the Daily Memphian at dailymemphian.com. You can subscribe to this podcast and our others at Google Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, and Stitcher. I'm Bill Dries. The Daily Memphian Politics Podcast is produced by Kix Patterson.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.